Hello, welcome to Coding on Crack, where today we're going to talk about AI and the future of software development. And in this first lesson, we're talking about AI and the tech industry. Now, I'm starting this new series because things are obviously changing in the world of technology, in the world of coding, especially with the advent of AI. People are losing their jobs, it's mayhem in the streets, maybe not, but it is kind of crazy. What's my experience with this? My experience at the moment is I've been graduated from college for a couple of months. I am working as the lead developer in a small startup company where we're developing applications for huge institutions like UCLA, UC Berkeley. We did some work on Humboldt, and now we're signing a deal with Johnson and Johnson, and I don't have a crazy amount of experience. I definitely don't have the kind of experience that you would need to do this job effectively, and yet I've built applications that are being used at this scale, and I guarantee I could not have done that without AI. I also have a buddy who has no understanding of code whatsoever, and he built a full stack application, and he's got a couple of subscribers and is trying to build it, but he's had major problems due to the fact that he doesn't know how to code. So we're kind of in this era and in this place in the development of the tech industry where AI and coding and software is still making tons and tons of money and is making huge waves and is arguably the best place to be if you want to become a millionaire. But it's becoming very unclear what skills you actually need in order to take advantage of artificial intelligence and actually take advantage of all of this software development. So I want to start looking at that, answering some of these questions, and hopefully showing you, okay, here's what you actually need to learn, here's what you don't need to learn, and depending on what your goals are, here's how you're going to generate wealth and utilize AI. So let's get started. For this first lesson, I just want to focus on AI in the tech industry. What's its role at the moment? What are its capabilities? So first off, we have this Sigmoid of Salvation is what I call it. At least it's the Sigmoid of Salvation for people who studied computer science. I actually studied electrical engineering, so I'm a little bit free of the little comp-sci scare, but I am my career has started off in software development, ironically enough, at a time where everybody's getting fired. So what is a sigmoid of salvation? Basically, this sigmoid, if you don't know what a sigmoid looks like, it's basically a graph that grows a lot at first and then it starts to even out at some point. The sigmoid of salvation is essentially showing that AI models are getting better, but the amount that they get better is decreasing with each new model. So we can see up here these most recent models aren't that much better from these models, but if you go way back at the beginning, we were seeing big leaps between each model. Now there are a lot of reasons for this. One of the major reasons is that the data supply has run dry. It's worth noting that we trained these models on the entire internet, and the entire internet is not necessarily going to get much bigger. And now if we try to draw from the internet, we're drawing from what other AI models have produced, and so we're just training the AI with outputs that are as good as its original outputs. So how much these models are actually going to improve from here is certainly uncertain, but to some certainly uncertain, but to some extent it seems like they may not grow as much as they did in their first few years of being released. And so we might be kind of reaching this plateau where the models are good and useful for developers and for people with programming skills, but not so good that they'll replace us entirely. This is leading to diminishing returns in improvements between AI models, resulting in the sigmoid of salvation. So what are the limits of AI? Let's look at some of these things. One of the first limits of AI is that we have it uses bad practices. Most of the code written on the internet is trash, and the AI is trained on that bad code. Now you are able to prompt an AI to essentially get it to write good, clean code, but in order to do that, you actually have to know what good, clean code looks like, and you have to have a certain set of skills. It also regurgitates information. AI can't brainstorm innovative solutions. It can simply regurgitate, compare, and contrast information that it already has access to. It's not an expert, so it's certainly better than a code virgin. A code virgin is somebody who doesn't know how to code. For example, my buddy who made his application. So it's certainly better than a code virgin or a beginner, 110%. But any seasoned professional is going to be able to see the flaws in most of the code it spits out. I noticed this in myself when I first started coding. I learned completely on my own because I started coding before AI was a thing. And then when AI came out, it was like, oh, this code is so great. It's so much better. I never would have thought of these things. And it was significantly better than anything I could write. Then I focused on using AI as a learning resource, and I continued to build my skills. I took more courses through college, and over time, I was able to start seeing code that AI would pump out, and I could start to see problems with it. I could start to see why this might cause issues further down the road. I would see, oh, this violates the open closed principle, things like that. And then I would, take that code and rearrange it and make it much better. But yeah, AI's coding skills are always going to land somewhere between a beginner and somebody who's intermediate or relatively beyond intermediate, relatively beyond intermediate. But it's not necessarily going to be at that expert level. And then we also have the limit of essentially the way that research grows. So most of the code written on the internet is trash. This is the code AI is trained on. Something went awry here. Oh, yeah. All right. So, research growth. What does research growth actually look like? Essentially, we see technology growing exponentially, right? And this is just general growth pattern for wealth, for resource acquisition, all these things. Some phenomena follow an exponential growth path. Technology is one of those, but science and research do not follow an exponential growth path. Science and research follow essentially a step function where you don't see much progress for a while, and then all of a sudden you see a leap because there's some breakthrough. But then now there's a million new things you need to try to get to the next breakthrough, and so you have failure, 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 failure. Oh, breakthrough, breakthrough, right? So AI is not necessarily going to grow exponentially. It's likely going to follow this step-based growth path that we see with most emerging fields, with most areas of scientific research, more than predictable exponential growth that we see with technology, such as like Moore's law for the number of transistors you find in a computer that grows exponentially because we essentially reach a point where we know how this stuff works, we know how it grows, we're just going to go on the path. AI in the job market. So there are a couple of reasons why the job market has gone haywire lately. Lots of computer science, software engineers are losing their jobs. There are a few reasons for this. One is the wait and see tactic. Many companies are using this tactic to determine what AI can do before hiring more developers. So a lot of companies don't want to hire on more developers because they're kind of like, all right, what are the limits of AI? How many developers do we actually need? We also have big companies that do this gatekeeping tactic. So essentially, some big companies are paying good programmers a lot of money to keep them from their competition. If you can find yourself in that spot, you're in a pretty good position. According to AI companies, right, so look at who's saying that LLMs are going to replace programmers. It's the people who are developing these AIs, right? They're essentially building a hype train. I know that there's been, AI is going to replace 90% of the developers out there, says Elon Musk, maker of Grok. That wasn't actually Elon Musk who said that. There are other CEOs that have said these things. A lot of these predictions are coming from people who are building these models and are likely just trying to create a lot of hype around these models. And finally, according to industry companies, many companies in the industry have actually outlawed the use of LLM for coding due to the problems it can create. So there's a lot going on. Of course, I know Microsoft just laid off tons of developers. Again, this wasn't an engineer decision. This was a management decision. And engineers classically hate management for many reasons. And one of those reasons is it makes decisions like this. And we've already seen in the context of Microsoft, they saw massive decreases in the quality of their software, and engineers are getting like overworked and all these things, and it's a bunch of bullshit. You also have this problem where a lot of companies did overhire for software engineers a couple of years back, maybe about 10 years back, and we're kind of seeing the aftermath of that too. So a lot of the loss of software jobs has to do with a response to an overhiring process that took place 5 to 10 years ago, more than the advent of AI. So let's see what's next here. So let's talk about this $1 million mindset. Blah, blah, blah. $1 million mindset shifts. In this section, I essentially just want to look at like, all right, how should we be viewing AI at this point? Obviously, AI makes developers much more efficient. Do we still have a need for developers? Is the need for software engineers going to go away? Honestly, who knows? A lot of the points that I just made were points to say like, hey, I don't think that it's necessarily the end of the world. I think comp-sci majors are going to start getting jobs again, but there are going to be differences in the way that we go about computer science. The reality is if you studied all the skills that developers had 20 years ago, you would be out of a job, right? Nobody needs somebody who knows like assembly or who can just like write code in assembly. That's ridiculous. Now, maybe if you're working on like the assembly side of like development, because I know like CISC 5 or RISC 5, what was that? I know that there's progress being made in that world, but most people aren't going to be going and studying assembly language. They don't necessarily need to know like old versions of C. You need newer versions of C. There are already outdated coding skills that you don't learn anymore. So you put all those to the side, and if you want to get into software engineering, you learn the most recent skills. What that skill set looks like is changing. But let's look at this. I'm going on a tangent if I'm being honest. Old, new. So old mindset, developer versus AI. That's how a lot of comp-sci people are. This is a sentiment I saw a lot in my classes. A lot of people are like, oh no, like AI is going to take our jobs and we're screwed. The new mindset is developers with AI. The reason I'm able to do my job is because I utilize AI and I'm able to essentially be the only developer on this team. We don't need a whole set of 15 developers to get off the ground. We're able to kind of get money coming in and start my career by just me being there. If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't be able to afford to hire on a whole team of developers. So my company not my company, but the company I work for, just straight up wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be able to exist. But because I'm able to be an AI accelerated developer, I'm able to perform at a level that allows us to produce value, that allows us to get jobs, that allows us to generate wealth and then make me money, make them money, we're all happy. So AI is a huge asset that we should not be afraid of. The next mindset shift that will make us millionaires, hopefully, maybe, is instead of seeing it as something that's going to remove jobs, we need to see it as something that's going to create jobs. Again, my job would not exist if I didn't have the capacity to use AI. Otherwise, I would have to go work for one of these massive companies, which already has a shit ton of developers and honestly isn't looking for another like fresh out of college developer unless I have some connection within that company. So it is going to allow a lot of businesses to start with a much lower barrier of entry, because all of a sudden, instead of needing to spend a shit ton of money on a shit ton of developers, you can have 2, 3, 4, 5 developers and start to get off the ground. Small teams equals less opportunities. Small teams equals more opportunities. Yeah, so you might be thinking now like, oh, but if your company only needs like 5, 6 developers, doesn't that mean that there's going to be like way less developer jobs? I don't think so. Again, the reason I think that that's the case is all of a sudden you can you can have a much smaller team to go and start a job. So while my company might not need as many developers to get started, there's only, there's fewer spots in my company. At the moment, it's me. Um, while that might be the case, there's also going to be a lot more companies that can spring out of that. So instead of just, the one company providing jobs for 100, it's going to be 100 companies providing jobs to 5 people. And the reason this is because there are a huge amount of problems that need to be solved in the world. There are always problems that need to be solved. You'll have people who start to identify these problems, and they identify the problem, and now the barrier of entry is lower, and they go, oh shit, I could start a company around this realistically, just hiring on 1 or 2 developers. So it is going to create more opportunities, in my opinion. A massive perspective shift that, again, very important. Wealth is traded to instead seeing wealth as generated. This is huge, huge, huge. If you want to make a lot of money, you need to make this mindset shift. And it's not only in the realm of software and AI. Many people see money and wealth as a limited resource, and this limited resource gets passed around, and you need to hold on to as much of it as you can, and give a little bit of away, but make sure you get more. I think the primary reason we think this is because most of us are trading time for money, right? And so that kind of makes money gives money a linear growth path. Money or wealth is generated. What does that mean? How do you take that mindset shift? If you've ever read this book, The Richest Man in Babylon, there's a very good illustration of this. Essentially, the richest man in Babylon is talking to one of his friends, and one of his friends is like, well, if everybody figured out how to make like hella money, wouldn't the money run out? And he's like, no, because think about what happens when somebody builds a house on a plot of land. First, they purchase that plot of land, so they've given somebody money. But this plot of land isn't worth very much because there's no infrastructure there. But then they go and build a house. Well, now they've given money to carpenters. They've given money to planners and architects and electricians. They probably didn't have electricity in Babylon, but you know what I mean. So they've spent all this money to build this house, and now they have this house, and now all of a sudden that plot of land is also itself worth more. So the amount of wealth in this area has grown substantially. So that's what I mean when I say we're generating that shit. It's that when you invest into something, when you produce something, you've created wealth. You've created out of the cosmic mystic land or whatever. Another way to think about this is just think about how much wealth the world has now versus how much it had 5,000 years ago. There are resources that we've extracted from the world that we're able to utilize now that didn't exist back then. And as we do that, and as we become more efficient at it, we're able to generate that wealth at a faster pace. So do not see wealth as a limited resource. Instead, see it as something that we generate, and the faster and the more efficiently we can work, the quicker we can generate that wealth, and that wealth is going to be reflected in money. Finally, don't see AI as a polarizing force. See AI as an equalizing force. If we see AI as this polarizing force, I've heard this argument before, like, oh, when AI starts taking everybody's jobs, it's going to make the poor poorer and the rich richer, and then all of a sudden we're going to need to, we'll need handouts because, if everybody's losing their job, they can't make money. So if they can't make money, they need handouts. I think this is a bunch of bullshit. The reason I think this is a bunch of bullshit is because, as I've said before, AI decreases the barrier of entry to generate value. If you can generate value, you can generate wealth. If that barrier of entry is lower because of AI, more people are going to be able to compete with what are already existing large institutions. So let's say Facebook. Because of AI, Facebook is able to run off of 100 software engineers and 300 marketing agents, whatever. Well, if that's the case, then all of a sudden you're able to match and compete with Facebook with just the same amount of people. So all of a sudden your barrier of entry to compete with Facebook has decreased, which means that the barrier of entry to go and solve problems that humanity is facing has decreased. And thus, this is an equalizing force, because by a lower barrier of entry, it means more and more people are able to engage in the marketplace and generate wealth, generate value, contribute in a meaningful way, and bring some of that wealth into their own pocket. I do think that handouts and maybe I'm getting a little political here, but I do kind of see handouts as a way to keep the poor and dependent on the rich, so that they don't generate wealth that can be used independently of the desires of the rich, because that's essentially what the handouts are. It's like, here's money, but you can only use it on these things. So we got to watch out for that. In conclusion, so what is my conclusion? I don't know. I wrote this a while back, so we're going to read and find out. AI and LLMs in particular is a massive innovation, are a massive innovation, that will heavily affect the career of developers. But like any other technology, it has its limitations. Understanding these limitations and capabilities allows us to leverage AI to optimize our developer career. I won't lie to you. If you try and become a traditional developer, it will fail. The landscape has changed, and so must our map. Going forward, we will look at what it looks like to be a developer in the age of AI, and outline what the roadmap to get there in this new era looks like. Essentially, what I'm trying to say here is AI has changed everything. This is good for some reasons, bad for other reasons. Our traditional map or our traditional path of education, our traditional responsibilities are shifting and are changing, and we're going to need to stay caught up to that. AI has a lot that it does well. It has its limitations. Let's be aware of its limitations, and let's adapt our skill set to be able to utilize it to the maximum capability so that we can start to generate wealth. We can start to do things like, start a little company that serves large institutions with 3 or 4 people, and without needing huge amounts of investments up front to even get off the ground. This is something we need to utilize, but we need to work efficiently. We need to know what we're doing, and we need to take a direct path and not meander too much. So in the future, I am going to start looking at, okay, what does that educational pathway look like? What do those actual skills look like? And then we'll look at, okay, how do we use what we've learned to actually generate wealth, to actually use these tools and build large businesses. So that's my chat with you guys today. Thank you for consuming this digital content, and I will see you next time.